All right, so this week we're going to pick up in Vayikra chapter 5, verse 15. Now I'm going to remind you quickly that in verse 14 it said, and Yahweh spoke to Moshe saying. So what does this do? It changes what was the word we were going to, topic. I want to change that word to topic instead of subject. I did go over that yesterday. Okay, so that's where we were. We're changing the topic. All right, so 5:15 says in very plain English, won't make any sense English, soul for shall be treacherous, I can barely say that, and sin and error, holy things, Yahweh, of course, and make come, or bring, in other words, guilty to Yahweh, ram perfect from a sheep estimate, silver shekels in shekel, the holy to guilt. That one's kind of tough, right? But we start off with the word nefesh. Nefesh is used of several things in Hebrew, as is common in Hebrew, one word for many things. But the way we mostly think of this word is that's the part of you that lives on after your body turns to dust. You know, your soul, as we say it in English, nefesh in Hebrew. But it's also used for breath. It's used for life. It's used for I think that's pretty much it. Those type of things. So we can move on. Then it says ki, which in Hebrew is used either of an interrogatory, if this, then that kind of thing, or for the word
blessing
because.
בעברית.
You never did turn that thing off. You never do? Oh, okay. That's the first time I've ever noticed it. Where was I? Oh, for, F-O-R, not the number, but for a while, for this, as opposed to that. I don't know, something like that. Or the word because, which the word for, F-O-R, and because are essentially the same thing, aren't they? But those are your most common uses for that word. And then depending on the sentence, we know how that plays out. And you do after a while, you just get it. Then it's me'ol, shall be treacherous. Ma'al, treacherous. To act treacherously, to be faithless. What is faithless in the Bible? Non-Torah observant. That's faithless. Now, when this word is followed by a bait, it is of a thing. To take anything by stealth. To whisper, to backbite. Why would they say that? Well, because in acting treacherously, it's to be concealed. It's to be hidden. You know, you're not doing it out in the open. So it's to do it by stealth. You see how that one word has so much meaning, right? The primary signification of the root seems to be that of covering, whence to act covertly. I didn't know I was going to say that. But anyway, we know what treacherous is. It's the right word in English for us to use in place of ma'al. Then your next word, of course, is ma'al. It's the same word. So it said ti ma'al, ma'al, right? So it's shall act treacherously. So it's to treacherously act treacherous. Quite literally. I mean, you see where that's going, right? This is vechatah, vechatah, and sin. That's that word where it's to miss, to err from the mark. Speaking of an archer, you know, he pulls back the bow and he misses. All that nonsensical stuff that you read today that has nothing to do with biblical Hebrew. But, and I'm going to say it again, I'm just going to say it all the time. Every chance I get, I'm going to keep saying this because I want the whole world to know what sin was and what it wasn't back in the day of the Bible. Because what it is and what it isn't now is pretty convoluted. But it's a verse that it's a sentence, let's just put it that way. It's a sentence that every Jew and every Gentile needs to learn by heart. And yes, it was written by Yochanan ben Zakkai. Now we know Jews are like, oh, you mean the guy that wrote the Mishnah? I'm pretty sure it is that very same person. But that very same person also wrote some other things. And he wrote this in a letter that's now known as 1 John chapter 3, verse 4. Pretty easy to remember. You got the 1, then you skip the 2 and have a 3, then a 4. So it's 1, 3, 4. Just forget the 2. But in it he said, and of course I'm going to say it in English. He said this in Hebrew. But in English, what it translates out to is everyone who commits sin is also in rebellion of the Torah. Well, what? Why would he be in rebellion of the Torah? And by the way, he put a comma after that. No, he didn't. They didn't have commas back then. But in English, you put a comma there because he's not finished talking. So he said, and everyone who commits sin is also in rebellion of the Torah, comma, because sin is Torah rebellion. That is the sum total of what sin is and what sin is not. And as I always say, it does not make any difference how offensive we find something. If the Torah does not declare it to be sin, it is not sin. If the Torah tells us to do something and we don't, that is sin. If it tells us not to do something and we do it anyway, that is sin. The Torah tells us not to scar our flesh. It's burning the flesh to make to brand. You know how some of those football players are doing that? They're branding these symbols on their arms. It literally, very specifically says not to do that. It says not to scar or cut our skin in any way. And it says not to tattoo our skin. That is in the law. So if you have tattoos, you are living in sin. Well, but Rob, what do I do now? I didn't know that back in those days, or maybe I didn't know and I didn't care back in those days. And now I'm old and that big, magnificent ship I used to have looks like a tugboat. See, this is where grace comes in, because God looks at it and he laughs so hard. Anyway, no, I'm just. Anyway, y'all know what I'm doing there. Yeah, it's a sin. Is it the kind of sin that you get thrown in hell forever for? No. Are you punished? Yeah, you'll be punished. What's the punishment? I don't know. I have no idea. I know it's not a serious punishment, because everything in God's world is what they call eye for eye, tooth for tooth, whatever for whatever. That's of course an idiom, right? God didn't mean for you to go poke your own eye out if you happen to inadvertently poke someone else's out in a fight. That's not what God's saying. That's an idiom. And the punishment must fit the crime. That's what they mean. So whatever punishment fits that crime, and I have no idea what it is. Maybe you'll have to brush for a year in heaven. I don't know. I have no idea. I know it's not serious. On the other hand, if you go and murder someone, I know that's serious. What is it? I don't know, because I know several murderers in the Bible, and any shadow of a doubt, were punished for what they did. But what that punishment was, I have no clue, because it doesn't say. Obviously, that's going to be between you and God, and it wasn't important enough that the writers of the biblical text thought things. Probably because if God didn't tell them about it, there wasn't any reason to speculate on it. We know that it'll fit the crime, and whatever that crime is. So there's no reason to give up just because you have a shoulder some other place. Anyway, our next word is bishagaga. That's my favorite Hebrew word. It's got to be bishagaga. Do y'all remember what that? An error. It's a fault, but it's something that you did wrong inadvertently. You didn't do it wrong on purpose, right? It's an accident, if you will. An error can be Anyone getting your facts incorrect, to driving down the road and some guy is over here in this lane and you don't see him and you switch lanes and they drive off the cliff and get killed. There's got to be people that have done that over the years, uh, but they don't know what happened, right? So are they not going to be punished because they didn't know? Of course they are, and that's important when we start talking about saying that's still murder. It's that'd be manslaughter, I think, but you won't be punished by man for it, but trust me, you're going to be punished by God. What is that? I do not know. Is it going to send you to hell for the rest of eternity? No, it doesn't work that way. So anyway, let's not get off on the extremes here. So shagaga, an error. Now our next word is mikachira, but mem off of the front and the sheen yod off of the back, because those are additions. What do you have? So the mem at the front of it is our word from. Literally, the yod at the masculine. It's not actually saying he, or it could be it. Sometimes when they say put the yod at the end, it means it. But we know by rolling out the whole sentence, we can figure this out. But it's only a holy thing, a thing consecrated to God, especially in silver, consecrated in the temple. Because that was what they used to bring, they'd bring the silver, and because it had some king or whatever, it wasn't about the king in particular, but it was one of those gray areas, because it was a coin is literally, on a micro level, it's three-dimensional, but truthfully, on a more practical level, it's two-dimensional. So it's one of those gray areas. It's kind of we're not supposed to have it because we can't have graven images, but on the other hand, doesn't really fall into the actual category of what that word means. So when you brought that stuff, they would exchange it, you bring it to them and they would give you silver coins that they made that were worth the same amount of money. In other words, it was the same amount of silver content. And then you would exchange that money with the money changers, as they're called, and then that money that you changed it for, you could then give as a donation to the temple. It was more just trying to be safe than sorry kind of thing. It wasn't something that absolutely had to be that way, but because there was some doubt, that's the way they did it. And then the next word is the proper name of God. And I've said this to you guys, the guys that are here with me right here live, whether over the internet or in the building, you guys have heard me say this before. You see all these books out there, the 70 names of God, the 100 bazillion names of God, whatever, the 20 names. Everybody's got all these they did there for a long time, for about 10 years. That was the thing to do. The so-and-so names of God. God only has one name, and El is not God's name. I was watching a show last night, and the guy kept saying the name of God was El. No, it's not. El is the Hebrew word that means God. G-O-D. It's not a name. It's what would you call that? A title? Yeah. Title, I guess. It could be any God. Yeah, right. Because it's a generic word. It can be any God. And they did use the word El of false gods. So that is not God's name. And like the Christians say, Jehovah Jireh. Oh my God. There's so many things wrong with that. But because it's Yahweh Yerah is how you actually say that. And it's the God who provides, but that's not his name. That's an attribute. We say Yahweh Shalom. because he's the God that brings us peace. But that's not his name. That's an attribute. He is the God who brings peace. So his one and only name is Yahweh. And that's as close as we can get to pronouncing it the way it was pronounced. We don't know what it really sounded like. And everybody who says that they know, they're kidding themselves. They're literally lying. Whether they know it or not, I don't know, because I think some of these people truly believe that they have this Gnosticism. I mean, this special knowledge. They have the knowledge. But anyway, as close as we can get to it today is Yahweh. We know that's not right, but we know it's really close. Or at least it should be. So it's why I say that name, because for one thing, there was nobody in the biblical period that had a problem with saying God's name. Not one of them. Because if they had of, his name would not show up almost 8,000 times in the biblical text that we have. And what we have of the biblical text is only about half of what was actually written. Yeah, the other half of the Bible is missing. And for the Christians, did you know that the other half of the New Testament is missing as well? Yeah, there were 3 letters to the Corinthians, not 2. But anyway, of the ones that we have, 8,000 times. And if you if the numbers are the same, then that means there was at least 16,000 times God's name was written down. If they didn't want you pronouncing that name, it wouldn't have been in the text. Besides, the stories tell us that not just foreign kings, but foreign slaves knew and pronounced ambiently the name of God. It's in the Bible, talks about it. Now, foreign slaves can pronounce the name of God out loud. We, the children of God, we should be pronouncing the name of God. Because the biggest problem I have with it is, how long would my marriage last if I refuse to call my wife by her name? Refuse, because that's what this is. This is an absolute refusal to call God by his name. And it's always followed by rage if you're the one that called him by his name. So I don't think it shows any understanding of God or God's word at all. And it certainly doesn't show any intimacy or friendship or knowledge of God in any way, shape, or form. So anyway, our next word is vehevi. And that's the word that it's to make come, literally. So it's bring and bring. So you're going to bring something to a place. It's to bring it from over there to over here. It could be a tomato. It could be a cow. It could be money. I mean, it's just of the idea of bringing it from point A to point B, right? Then it says et, which is just a pointer. It has no meaning. Then, so what's it pointing at? Ashamo. Ashamo. It's a bit of a sound-alike word, but Ashamo is guilt he. So it's his guilt. There's a fault here. There's a guilt. There's blame that has been occurred. That has, that's not, I didn't say that right. Incur, right? Anyway, is there an occurred? Yeah. There is, isn't there? Incurred. But incurred would be the right way to say that. And again, if it's guilt, then what can we know about this? We know that the guilt comes about through the not doing what God was told, or doing what God told us to, or doing what he said not to. It's breaking God's law. That's what incurs guilt. Okay, so then it says God's name again. It's to, only this time they put the lamed in front of it, so it's to God. This is ayil. So you're going to bring to God for that guilt a ram. Ayil is ram. And that's from the image of the twisted horn. You know, some of them have is that really a ram? I think they're talking about the ones that do this, right? They come out this way and roll back, because you got to think of where you are too. But anyway, it's the word ayil is from the idea, the pictures of the horns that are on the rams. All right, then it says tamim. This is the word perfect, complete, whole, entire. So what are they talking about? Well, this is a ram that has never said a cuss word. He's never shown his, no, this is a ram that has no blemishes, right? There's no puffy places in his skin or any, right? It's a perfectly healthy, top dollar kind of ram. And then it says mean, which is from hazon. So you bring it from the flock. The zone is literally sheep, but it's also literally flock. And then it's be'er checha. This is putting something in a row, but it's more about the estimation. It's about the assessment. You're going to assess its value, its worth. And then you're going to assess it how? Well, it's worth 10 number one draft picks. No, in this case, it's worth what? Kesef. It's silver. Silver what? Just a big rock of silver? No. Silver shekalim. That's shekel in plural. Shekalim. Shekel. So those are coins. Then it says best shekel. So it's shekel in shekel. Or shekels in shekels. They're both plural. Then it's hakodesh. And that's the holy. That which is set aside for God, the holy. Le'asham, for the guilt, the blame, whatever it is that has brought guilt on you, that's what this is for. So our translation then is, because a soul shall be grievously treacherous. Why can I say that today? Treacherous. Because a soul shall be. Now it's not if, remember the if, for, or because. This is because a soul. You don't say if. Why? Because we know that a soul is going to do this. Probably every soul is going to do this at some point in their life. But anyway, maybe not. Because a soul shall be grievously treacherous, remember that twice, and will sin through ignorance against the holy things of Yahweh. He will bring in his guilt offering to Yahweh, a ram, an unblemished one from the flock. You will estimate its worth in silver shekel by the shekel of the sanctuary for a guilt offering. And we can compare that to chapter 4, verse 27 and 28. They kind of broke it up into two verses there, where it says, and if one soul from the people of the land shall sin in error. And it's important that we realize this. The people of the land are who? The Jews. So it's important that you understand this is the Jews who live in the land of the Jews. These are the people who have to do these things, right? And if a soul from the people of the land shall sin in error in performing one of the commandments of Yahweh, which are not to be done, and becomes guilty. So these are, in this one, it's specific about you've done something you're not supposed to do. Then the next verse, or his sin which he sinned becomes known to him, he will bring an unblemished female kid from the goats for his sin which he sinned. Of the words in error, or in my case through ignorance, the Kyle and Deluge commentary to the Hebrew Bible says the following: the distinguishing characteristics of the sin is expressed by the term vishegaga, in error. To wander or go wrong signifies mistake, error, oversight. But sinning in error is not merely sinning through ignorance or hurry or want of consideration, which that one we would say lack of consideration. This was written back in the 1800s, so they spoke a little differently. Or in carelessness, they said, but also sinning unintentionally. Hence, all such sins as spring from the weakness of flesh and blood, as distinguished from sins committed with a high or elevated hand, or in haughty, defiant rebellion against God and his commandments. So they're making this separation here of the error, the mistakes that we make that, bring guilt on us. Because certainly, if we're driving down the road and we switch lanes and don't look and somebody winds up having a wreck and, maybe even dying from it and we don't even know about it, we're still guilty. But we didn't do that on purpose. We weren't some rebellious teenager that went and got a picture of a heart on their left shoulder. You know what I'm saying? He's saying that that's different, because someone who's doing that knowing that they're not supposed to, and they're just being rebellious against God, that's actually a much worse sin. Now, to compare that to someone dying because of what you did, I think that's a bigger sin. But what they're trying to do is make the difference between, let's say it's a small sin you don't realize you've sinned, and a small sin that you did on purpose, or a big sin that you don't realize as compared to a big sin that you did on purpose, right? They're just, I don't know why they felt that was so important. But they also said, lost my mouse for a minute there. They also said, in the case of the sin of a common Israelite, of the people of the land, in other words, of the rural population, and they give you Genesis 28:7 to compare that to. In other words, they didn't just make it up. They say that for a reason. That is to say, they went on, of an Israelite belonging to the people as distinguished from the chiefs who ruled over the people. And then they give some more examples of 2 Kings. I'll let them have that. I don't totally agree with it, but I don't disagree with it either. So, because I think that the people of the land are Israelites, regardless. You can even say that of the kings, but the Jews did make a distinction between the leaders and the regular people, the common people, as it's put in King James. All right. So let's go ahead and move on to verse 16. Yeah, we got plenty of time. Literally put, it's, and that sin from the holy, he peace and fifth he, Joseph upon him, and give with he the Cohen, and the Cohen he cover upon him in ram the guilt, and will be forgiven to he. Now, if you recall from last week, and if you missed last week, you've really got to go back and watch it. Last week, the law is just now making its turn to show you the connection between why the Kohanim do what they do and how that connects to what the Messiah will do. And I think that everybody, I didn't come right out and say that last week, but I think you caught that, right? Because I pounded on it pretty hard so that it would bring up other verses to your mind, and you could see that connection. We're going to get a little bit of that here, not as heartily as we did last week, but hang on. You'll start to see that it's beginning to shift and make that shift to where you're going to see more and more of the Messiah in all of this and why it's so important. All right. So anyway, literally in English, did I read that already? Yeah, I did. So it begins with ve'et, which is just and it's pointing, asher, and that's what? Chata, that's sin. That's that miss the mark, you didn't do what God said to do, or you did do what God said not to do. That's sin. That's the sum total of what sin is and what it isn't. So it's the sin, mean, which is from HaKodesh, the sin from the holy, or perhaps against the holy. Then it says Yes Shalom, which is, you hear shalom there? Yeah, it's peace, it's wholeness, it's soundness. And then the yod in the beginning is the his peace, or peace he, or he peace. Sounds funny when you say that in English, right? Doesn't seem strange at all in Hebrew. The and it's pointing to something. Hamishito. That's fifth. It's not five, it's fifth. Fifth. He. So his fifth. This is absolutely wrong. It's got the name Yosef here. And I think what we have is a sound-alike word with the wrong number on it. So let me think about that a minute. I'll come up with what that means. It's like back here. I need to get it up here. Just give me a bit. Let's move on to the next word. Alav, which is to him. To him. Natan, and give. Natan, to give. It's where we get the name Nathan. Natan, Nathan. Why does it say Nathan instead of Natan? Well, because when people began to translate the Hebrew text into English, they wanted you to know the difference between the tav and the tate, both of which make the T sound. So the tav, they would put th so that you know that connected to a particular letter in the Hebrew alphabet that made the T sound. And then they put just a T, and then you were to assume that came from the tate. So over time, that TH became a diphthong, if you will. Not a real one, but it just morphed into one. It became a slur. And uneducated people began to read these transliterations and began to say Nathan instead of Natan, or not Nathan. I guess you could say it that way, Nathan. It's not a, that's the wrong sound. The syllable should be Natan. And it was at one time pronounced Nathan, and that was incorrect because the word is Natan. Anyway, it's to give, to cause, to receive, to place something into somebody's hand. It's what we think of as to give. Then it says Oto, so it's with he, literally. La Cohen, the Cohen, Veha Cohen, and the Cohen. Something. Your hair is a covering. The stuff here, that's a covering. When you put your talit over your head, that's a covering. Put your blankets over you. It doesn't have to be over your head, but your blankets over you, that's a covering. My shirt right here is a covering. This talit's a covering. My pants are a covering. It covers something. Then it's Alav, which is to him. Be'el, remember Hayil, the ram, Be'el, with the ram or in the ram. So in this case, it'll be with. Ha'asham, the guilt, the ram for the guilt offering. Ve'nislach, and he will be forgiven. This is most definitely my favorite Hebrew word, at least at this moment. But do you remember what I told you last week? We can say it's as far as the east is from the west because a rabbi once said that 2,000 years ago, and he's not wrong. But it doesn't mean what we think it means today. We're taking it literal. It was a hyperbolic statement. It was idiomatic. It wasn't supposed to be taken literal. And then this idea of to be pardoned, this idea that's come about in the last 50 or 60 years of when God pardons you, it's like you never did it. No, it's not. No, never. No. To this day, Moshe, the guy they call Moses, is still a murderer. All throughout all eternity, he's never going to be able to say he never committed murder, because he did. King David, the guy David, right? David is his real name, but King David, he went in and he got a man's wife pregnant while he was married to like 50 other women, and because they weren't enough for some reason. And then when she turned up pregnant, He sent her husband out on the front lines to get him killed on purpose. That's murder. He's still guilty of all those things. So when we talk about forgiveness, when we talk about this word nislach, what are we supposed to understand? What we need to understand is this is mercy. This is way beyond mercy, but mercy is a better word for us to understand what's going on here. God has shown Moshe mercy in that we know Moshe is in heaven. We know that he didn't go to hell. We know he paid a price. And whether that price was full on whatever would normally happen to a murderer, in heaven, I don't know. Whether that means that he suffered a little bit lesser of maybe you're supposed to do two eternities for every murder and he only got one eternity, I don't know. I don't know if it lessens all of that. I do know that because of God's mercy, because of what we call his forgiveness, we will still stand before him. We will still be able to fall on our face and worship him in his presence for all eternity because God is merciful. We don't know exactly how it works out, but we know that God is merciful. And God shows his mercy on us when that sacrifice by the Cohen has been made. And it's so important that the Cohen makes that sacrifice. We can't make that sacrifice for ourselves. But do you remember this word was that of lightness? The idea is that of lightness, of lifting up. It's from the root salah, which is to suspend a balance. And this is where we get the idea for righteousness. It comes from the same place. You imagine in your mind a balance. And on this side is the weight of your sin. And that weight is enough that it's going to put you in separation, in complete darkness, where there's wailing and gnashing of teeth for all eternity. Because it's flat down and the other side is up. And God's mercy comes in and lifts us up from that sin. And God balances the weight. That's the mercy of God, in that he gives that while we're still in the throes of that guilt. And it'll go on for all eternity. Just like what we did will go on for all eternity. There will never be a time in eternity where that balance will not be perfect, where that mercy will not cover us. That's some incredible mercy. Of course, the last word is lo, which is a sound alike. That's not negative. It's to him or it. Remember that he and it are the same thing in Hebrew. Okay, so our translation then is, and he will make peace for that sin against the holy. And he will add 1/5 to it and give it with it, the sacrifice, to the Cohen. And the Cohen will be a covering over him with the ram for the guilt offering, and he will receive mercy for it. Mercy, the it here, the he, is the sin. And he will make peace for that sin against the holy. Because when you sin against God, when you've done what he said not to do, or you haven't done what he said to do, your sin is against the holy. And he will add 1/5 to it and give it with the sacrifice. So there's a fifth. I hate to say this, but like interest added a fifth more. Remember, we had to see what it was worth in shekel, in shekalim. And so now let's say it was 10 shekalim. What is a fifth part added to the 10 shekalim, Donna? So it's 15 shekalim. So we're going to add all of that for this particular guilt offering, and we're going to give that with the sacrifice to the Kohen. And the Kohen will be a covering. The priest, the Kohen, remember that's the Kohen. The priest is the Hebrew word is Kohen. So everybody you know whose last name is Cohen, that means priest in Hebrew, right? Probably they're Jewish. Anyway, could have married into it. You never know. But that Cohen, the Cohen will be the covering over that person. He'll be the covering over that person's sin. The Cohen will, not the lamb, not the sacrifice that was made, not the 10 plus 5, not the none of all of that. None of that is the covering. The Cohen is the covering. And do we remember what the Cohen was called earlier in this chapter? Do you remember, Donna? You don't remember? Ruh-roh. Cohen HaMashiach.
Oh, yeah.
Cohen HaMashiach. Do you remember this? The Cohen becomes the Messiah. The Cohen is the covering, not the sacrifice, not the blood, not the money, the silver in this case, none of that. The Cohen is the covering over him. With the ram for the guilt offering, he who brought the guilt offering, and he, the person who brought this to the Cohen, will receive mercy for that sin. So if we're covered by the sacrifice of the Cohen, we receive mercy for our sin. Rashi attached the 1/5 edition to something supposedly defiled. It had to be something ugly. But the text clearly states that the 1/5 is taken from the value of the sacrificed lamb. Did y'all follow that? That makes sense? Okay. All right, I think we have enough time for this one. Verse 17, and if soul for shall sin and do one from all commandments, Yahweh, that not shall do, and not new and guilty, and will bear guilty. So now we're summing up, right? We've already been through this technically, but we're summing up. So it starts with ve'im, and because, not if this happens, but because this happens, right? So, and because nefesh, the soul. Remember when we started this chapter out as well, we talked about we have this same thing left over in the English language. When a plane goes down, and we saw this in a movie after I told you this, we watched this disaster movie and this plane was going down. They actually said it in the movie. How many souls were on board? When a plane goes down, when a ship goes down, they still say that to this day. How many souls were on board? And this is the same thing. So when it says, when a soul has done this thing, they're talking about a person. So you could change it from soul to person. And the translation would still be correct. And then it says, for, because, techeta. There's your word for sin. Shall sin. They add the te sound at the beginning because that's shall. Shall sin. They're going to do this. They're going to commit this sin. It's going to happen. The asta. I don't know if you can hear it, but asa, to labor, to work about, to make, to produce, to manufacture, to fabricate. So he's going to do it. He's going to make this thing happen that shouldn't happen, right? This sin's going to happen. Anyway, you're going to perform the work of that sin, right? Achat, that's the word for one. It's echad, but it's one with a feminine ending. That's why the hay turns to Tate, or the Dalet rather. But anyway, we have one Michol from what? From all the people? Could be, but that's not what it says. It says from Michol, from all mitzvot. So it makes no difference which law has been transgressed. It's one from any of them, right? And the mitzvot, that's the command, the precept, especially used in the precepts of God. The idea of prohibition is found here, and we see that even in this verse. Then it uses the name of God, the proper name of God, Yahweh. Then it says, Asher lo, that not. So now we're going to be more specific. That not, te'asena. There, you hear asa in there, that he's not supposed to do. So these are not the laws that you're supposed to, like you're supposed to wear a fringe. That's not one of the laws they're talking about. From any of the laws that you're not supposed to do. So these are specific to the thou shalt not. This is what these things are for. Because it's different to commit something that you weren't supposed to do than when you do something, than when you don't do something that you were supposed to. They are a different category of sin. And then it says velo yada. So and again, it's something you didn't know at the time that you had committed a sin. You know that happens. You say something that you shouldn't have said because it just was an outburst. You didn't mean to do it, but maybe it becomes known to you right away, which usually it does. Sometimes it doesn't. I mean, sometimes you say something to somebody and it seems right at the time, and later on you think about it and you say, I shouldn't have said that. I shouldn't have done that. I shouldn't have acted like that. These are the kind of things we're talking about. Well, they're among the things that we're talking about. And so and you didn't realize it. Then it says Ve Hashem, and it made you guilty. So here we go again. You're still guilty, even though you didn't know you did it. You're still guilty of it. That guilt is still on you. Why? Because God is a righteous God. He doesn't see this. One of the things that you see in our world today is you got people running around saying that nobody ought to be put to death who committed murder because we lower ourselves to that level. And the main thing that bothers me about that, one, of course, God said otherwise, and so I'm with God, because God's always going to be right. I don't care who you are. Just ask Socrates. Oh, you can't. That's right. Anyway, what was I talking about? So, to try to tell everybody around you that you're a higher level of consciousness than they are because you don't believe in the death penalty. What you're doing is very one-sided because you have no concern for the person who was murdered. And you have no concern for the people that were left behind, for the pain and the anguish and all that they go through because of what you did or what that person did. No, you're just talking about, oh, that poor little person. His mommy didn't hug him enough and his daddy called him names. Well, I could say that about my family, but I never murdered anybody. I'm sorry, I don't buy into any of that stuff. I didn't know I could blame my parents. I didn't know I could go kill my daddy and say it was his fault. What? I didn't know that stuff when I was young. So, never even thought about it. But that's what's going on these days. Is way too much of what's going on and being passed off as some kind of way to fix the injustice in this world. It's always very one-sided. It never considers the perpetrated. It only considers the perpetrator. You know what I'm saying? That's not a good thing. In God's world, that doesn't happen because that's not justice. It isn't. It doesn't make any difference if you murdered somebody and now you've come to the belief in God and you've decided to live the rest of your life according to the Torah to the best of your ability. God's not going to allow you. God's not going to allow you not to face your punishment. They're going to come from Him. So we can go and get those last second stays from the courts and say, oh, it's a miracle. No, it's not. No, it's not. It's injustice. But I digress. I better move on before somebody gets mad at me, right? All right, so our next word, venasa. That's and lift up to express the idea of raising up and carrying away. That's there's our word for remember the waters rose when we had the big flood, and the water is actually what lifted the boat off the ground. So the floods lifted it up and carried it away. That's what this word means. It's to bear up. It's used in all kinds of different ways. I mean, if I come along and you're in all bad mood, huffy puffy, and I make a joke and you start laughing, I lifted you up. That's one of the ways that they use that in Hebrew. If I make you smile, if I make you happy when you're down, I've lifted up your countenance, is that was the way they would say it. Anyway, asapane. Anyway, our next word, avono, is guilt. This is the word for perversity, depravity, a depraved action, a crime, a sin. What's a sin? You guys know. All right, so our translation is, and if a soul shall sin and commit from any commandments of Yahweh, which he is forbidden to do, and did not know, he is guilty and will bear his guilt. That lays it out pretty clear, doesn't it? Even if you don't know, you're still guilty in the eyes of God because God sees it all. All right, so if we can compare that to chapter 4, verse 2, it says, speak to the children of Yisrael, saying, if a soul shall sin in error from any of the commandments of Yahweh that are not to be done, and has accomplished one of these, has done one of these. So it's just another way of saying the same thing, isn't it? The one that we just did is more of a summation, where the last one was more of an explanation. All right, of the word soul, even Ezra wrote that the word soul should be used since thoughts to commit sin originate in the soul. He's right about them originating in the soul, because in the Hebrew world of the Bible, the heart, the soul, the mind, all of that's one thing. So if your heart says yes, your mind says no, you're schizophrenic. That's the way it worked in the biblical world. So he is right to the degree that sin originates in the mind, right? But to say that's why you use the word soul, no, you use the word soul because it's the right translation. Sifra believed that soul included non-Jews and servants. That sounds funny, but there's a reason why in the 1st century CE, Jews called other Jews Gentiles. And they did. Gentiles being non-Jews was a later addition that come from Christianity. It did not come from Judaism. Judaism jumped on board in the Dark Ages, But it's not something that Judaism did in the first century. If you were called a Gentile in the first century, it was generally because you didn't speak Hebrew. There were a lot of Jews in the first century, even in Judea, that didn't speak Hebrew. They spoke Greek. And the further you got away from the city of Jerusalem, the further you got away, the more likely it was that you didn't speak the word. So you were called Goim, Gentile. Nachmanides wrote that the sin originates in the soul and blemishes it. Again, they're just being way too literal here. They're being too physical here for me. I'm sorry. They're just not getting the use of soul here. All right. We have utterly run out of time, so we'll have to pick up with 18 next week. Shalom, y'all.